Welcome, everybody, to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast. I'm Pete Wright. There's Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, Pete Wright.
How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah? Feeling good?
I am, and I'm ready to take notes.
What are notes?
What are
notes, really? We're talking. This is a digital episode, but it's sort of a paltry digital episode. Mostly because you've heard it all before. What I'm an advocate of. You know the tools that I use. I'm going to talk a little bit about them, but I want to talk more about process. And it starts with one of the things that you mentioned last week, which was building awareness of your habits and behaviors at work. Do you remember that? Were you there?
I do.
Oh, yeah, you were there.
I don't. I don't remember that. Yeah. No.
What, I don't listen to the show? What?
I said what?
Totally not me. It really sticks with me, this idea of, how do you get a better handle of your routines? And I told the story about how, when I started working on contract on an hourly basis, getting in touch with how I worked, the behavior that I experienced when I worked, made a big difference in my ability to be successful on projects.
What's really interesting to me about that is that it really is a very clear distinction between hourly and salary, right? Because It wasn't until you went hourly that you really tracked your time and realized what you were doing. I just think that's really an interesting concept.
Yeah. Well, and you can say the same, right? I mean, It's when you stop working for somebody on salary, you get in touch with your time in a much more intimate way. It's no longer from 8 to 5.
Right. That's so true. I wonder how many hours are wasted. Like if you were to look at productivity wise between a salary and an hourly, just like in any kind of like big company, I wonder if there are, it'd just be interesting to see the statistic of how many hours are wasted on a salary employee. Yeah. Like, do they waste time? Like, do they take an hour to go to the bathroom? I don't know.
Yeah. What is the impact of a water cooler conversation, for example?
Exactly.
The impact, there is an economic impact to the water cooler conversation. When you work hourly, you don't have to think about that. So that, it's sort of neither here nor there. But the bigger question is, what is the economic impact of going to work with ADHD? And
that's right.
The statistics are not in your favor if you are struggling with ADHD, and that you're less likely to be able to hold down a full-time job if you're struggling with severe ADHD. The billions of dollars are wasted in lost income when you are struggling with ADHD. That is a significant thing. So one of the things that I keep thinking about is, what are the tools that we can use to help leverage your strengths and compensate for weaknesses at work, right?
So what have you come up with to solve this problem?
Well, I don't know. I got some ideas.
Oh, good.
The first one is to look at time, and I love timers. I love the idea of timers. The timer that I use a timer on my phone, and I love the timer on my phone. It gives me a sense of being able to. And I'll post links to this in our show notes on the website. It's called Best Timer. It's for iOS. I'm an iPhone guy, so my timer is iOS, but it gives me a couple of different time options. One is a countdown timer that's similar to a time timer. So it shows you kind of the hand sweeping down, so you see volume of time, right? You see time in chunks. It's not just like a digital clock counting down. And I really don't like the digital clock counting down, because when you see just that number, you lose the sense of physical space of time, right?
Yes, exactly. I agree.
We just did the same thing for my son. I should post a picture of this on the website. We have this window of time in the morning. We have to wake up we have to have the kids downstairs at 6:30 in the morning to eat breakfast, and so we can leave the house by 7 to get him to school on time, get my son to school on time. And so, he has an alarm that goes off at 6. And then another one that goes off at 6:15. So he has some snooze time. At 6:15, he sits up and he looks at his clock on the wall. He has a big analog clock on the wall. It's like we bought a bunch of these like analog, like, it's like the school cafeteria clocks. Like they're just white face, black rim, right? Just big numbers. And we pasted, my wife pasted on the back a pie shape, right? A 90-degree pie shape on the back of the clock, so that it's like this pie piece sticks out between 6:15 and 6:30. So if you can kind of envision this fin coming out between 6:15 and 6:30 with pictures of the activities he has to do within that time. So he sees when the clock hand hits 6:15, this fin is there for 15 minutes, and it says you have to brush your teeth, get dressed, make your bed, and come downstairs. And those 4 things have to happen between 6:15 and 6:30. Does that make sense? So he has a visual, a visual cue, and because for him, we're trying to establish independence. For the rest of us who are struggling with ADHD, having a visual pie slice that says this is the shape of my time, sometimes that gives us a much greater relative appreciation of the activities we have to do in that period.
That's great.
Yeah, so timers are big. Now, back to activities. How often do you find you're sitting at the computer and you're thinking, "Oh my gosh, I'm so busy. I better check Facebook." Right?
I never do that. Oh my gosh, it's awful. And then I'm sitting there and I'm like, "Why am I on Facebook when I'm so busy?"
Yes. Yeah.
What am I thinking?
There are so many reasons that you are thinking those things, but I'll tell you, one of the things I love so much, there's a set of applications that allow you to see a report of the activity that you are engaging in on your computer.
You can see a report of the activity that you're engaging in on your computer. That's amazing. That's cool.
It's super cool. So there are 2 applications I'd like to point you to. On a Mac, you're looking at an app. It's available for $5, for $4.99 in the Mac App Store, called TimeSync. Right? TimeSync. And what TimeSync does, it runs in the background. It's a little menu bar icon, right? And you turn it on and you just let it run. Right? You just let it run, and then you don't think about it anymore. So turn it on Monday, and on Friday, open it up and look at your activity report, and it shows you bar graphs of the apps, the individual apps or websites that you had open in that period, and what time of the day you are using them. So you can see over time a nice comparative slice graph that says, here are the pools of applications that we call work applications. Maybe it's Microsoft Office, maybe it's Mail, maybe it's, whatever it is that you work in. And those you spent, 40% of your time in this, but you spent 60% of your time on the web looking at TMZ and Facebook and right? And so you can see where you spent your time and how many hours aggregate you spent with these apps in the foreground. So, for example, if you have Mail open, but you're not using it, it's not in the foreground. So you only see the little slice of on the day. Maybe you have it open only a half hour on a given day, even though it's launched. You can see how much it's launched. It may have been launched 29 days ago, but you've only been using it for a little bit of time. So it gives you that sense of relative activity in a visual block of time that helps you rationalize the time you spend doing certain things. So I find that really, really useful, and it helps you to get out of to avoid, at least on the computer, the manual time tracking thing, which you may fudge. Let's just say it.
Well, what's interesting, though, is you can kind of see how they can work together, though. I mean, like we were talking about last week, if you are taking a couple of days to track what your distractions are, right, bringing back the awareness piece of it, and you're tracking your distractions, plus you have this app working, and it's also going to tell you how much time you spent on these different sites or programs or whatever. I mean, what a great... you can't get any better awareness than that. You really can't. It is this is awareness it is calculated awareness, and that is really. And so if you're on Windows, there are a number of applications on both platforms for these, but the powerhouse application on Windows is called Rescue Time, and I should say Rescue Time is also available for the Mac, but it is more expensive. It's $9 a month. It is a monthly fee, but you can pay annually. It's $72 for a year, but you get 4 months free if you go for Rescue Time, and it gives you similar and robust time tracking
If you want to get serious about productivity on your computer, these are the tools to do: time, sync, and rescue time, depending on your platform. So that's one. Now, so that helps you build awareness. And then, there's this whole, what do you do during the day? And I think we've talked about these, the issues that face you when you're struggling with ADHD, whether it's time management, organization, listening, taking turns, that sort of a thing, following directions. And a lot of those things, I come back to some of my old favorites. Do you have a system for tracking your work? And for me, again, I've talked about GTD, getting things done, David Allen's original process for work management, for task and really life management. And if you really embrace GTD, it is a robust system for managing every area of your life, and helping you be as effective and efficient as you possibly can. It is challenging to do that, and you really do have to commit. And sometimes that's difficult for if you're struggling with ADHD. You've got to study, and that becomes part of the thing that you need to do. But I would suggest that there is great value in becoming a student of a platform, of a system like that, whether it's GTD or Pomodoro, whatever. Become a student of a platform and get yourself sharpened up on some of these work management skills. There is nothing worse than working, and I can say this as a provider of services to other people who don't have their lives in order. It is very challenging to work for somebody who's out of control, who's struggling with ADHD and is not able to keep their work and their responsibilities in order, and so you're doing yourself a favor, and you're doing your team a favor, because they have to interact in your orbit, and you want to make that as easy for them as possible and rational.
Well, and don't you think like the system like GTD? I mean, I am with you. I mean, I think it's a great system. And there's definitely been pieces of it that I have adopted and have never given up and probably never will. But those type of systems, I mean, they can become pretty complex. And so wouldn't you agree that, you study, that's kind of a leading question. Wouldn't you agree? Because if you don't agree, I'm going to get mad. I'm kidding. You can tell me if you don't agree. It's okay. But you take the pieces out of GTD, for example, that really do resonate with you, that really work for you, and maybe, be a little kinder to yourself if some of it doesn't work. I mean, I don't know.
Oh, yeah, of course. But that's why I say be a student of a system. Right?
Yeah, right.
And because that means you're taking the time to reflect on the system, to reflect on where your system does work and where it is falling apart.
Right.
And if you do that, then you can use the electronic tools that make the most sense. Now that we've talked about OmniFocus obviously before, we've talked about Things, we've talked about Outlook, we've talked about using these tools in a way that makes the most sense for you, and understanding the contexts of where your work and life happens. But the rule of thumb that works for ADHD and not is to make sure you're working off of one list of work, right? This is the rule of the work box, right? This is where all of your email, all of your voicemail, all of your incoming activity from all of your assorted inboxes, they're all being channeled to one place where you manage your work, and that can be your calendar, it can be Outlook, it can be Things or OmniFocus. Wherever it is, this is where you manage your work product, and that is, I think, the number one thing.
That makes a big difference for sure.
And of course, my personal one is still a combination of OmniFocus and Evernote. I'm a huge fan of those things, obviously, but I want to move straight through that to the end of the day, where I'd like to add another tool to the technical basket, which we haven't thought of yet, and that is, it's called Calm. This is another Calm. It's another app for iOS, and it is a guided meditation app.
No, I love that.
All right.
Really?
I am so excited about this app. I can't even tell you. And so it's one of those, it's free. There are, you can buy up for specific guided meditations. But what I love so much about it is that it reminds us to be mindful. It says that you are, to be a whole person. Right? To be a whole person, you have to put the tools and systems in place to be able to be productive and to do so free of anxiety and stress that impacts your ability to be creative and passionate and vulnerable and active. Like, this is how you stay in touch with yourself. And so I'm a big fan of Calm. There are a number of these sort of apps, and so I offer Calm as one in a giant lake of apps that offer you this sort of meditation training, both Android and iOS. I encourage you to seek something out that fits for you, and find this sense of mindfulness, and use the technology you have around you to help you achieve that. Now, if you are able to go sit outside and cross your legs in a ray of sun ending in a rainbow and find your inner self for 10 minutes a day, and you don't need a guide of any sort, I encourage you to do it. But myself, as somebody who struggles with ADHD and can crawl out of my skin sometimes with frustration of sitting still, I need the voice in my head telling me where to go in my mind. So I encourage you to think that, to look at that if you haven't done so.
I love that. And you know what I love about that too is that also can be a huge tool or strategy for people to, well, and this is probably why you're saying this, is to deal with the overwhelm, from the day. So, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling stressed, you have anxiety, taking those few minutes at the end of the day for that mindfulness, I mean, that is going to do wonders for that. Yeah. Absolutely. I love really that. Is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that surprised me. I was not expecting that. I thought you were going to say something like, I don't know, tasktodoo.com.
I know.
Completed task or something.
I'm telling you, Calm has made its way to my homepage of apps. It's one of those that maybe it's because I'm a man of a certain age. That I've come to realize that my anxiety gets the better of me, and anxiety when exacerbated by ADHD. And September is a crazy busy month. It's just generally a crazy month, and I'm realizing that the impact of activity and stress is I'm not mindful. I am not fresh.
Okay, so with that being said, one of the podcast shows that I would like us to do in the future, I don't know when it will be planned, but at some point, is around mindfulness, around meditation for ADHD. But have you read the book 10% Happier by Dan Harris?
No.
Okay, so this is definitely a book I want us to briefly talk about at some point, because it is a great book, and I think you would find it really fascinating, and I think our listeners would too if you struggle with anxiety and that kind of negative thinking, or all of these things that can happen. You're comparing yourself to other people or whatever. But Dan Harris is a news anchor with ABC, and he talks about how he had a panic attack on the air, and basically the journey that he had to go through from this panic attack all the way to finding mindfulness and finding meditation. And it is a great book, and I would love for us to do a show about it, but you got to read it first, Pete.
I will do it. It's on my list.
Yeah, it's a really
I'll get
easy
it today.
read. Yeah, it's a really easy read. He doesn't actually come out and say that he has ADHD. I don't know if he does or not, but just some of the things that he references, it makes me wonder if he may not have it. I don't know. I mean, I'm not one to diagnose it, but there's definitely characteristics that he talks about in the book that I think anybody would relate to, but specifically with ADHD too, just that racing of the mind. So let's do that. Let's plan for that on the books and read it.
I'm getting it right now.
Yeah, 10% Happier.
That's wonderful. Fantastic. So that summarizes my story of the week. Any Very other good. Questions or comments from you?
No, that's great. I'm going to look at the app today. Calm.
Yes, absolutely.
But thanks.
All right. Hey, thanks everybody for listening. You can find out more about the show. Head over to the website or jump into iTunes and just search for us there. You can search for the ADHD podcast. We'll come right up. We sure appreciate kind comments and positive ratings. It's very motivating for us. Thank you to everybody who's taken the time to do that. You can find out more about Nikki and her coaching. And that, I didn't mention this, but really the number one thing, if you are struggling with setting up your the tools that you need at work, if you want to be most effective, is get a coach. Work with a coach for a little bit. Call Nikki, straighten your work stuff out. That she's going to help you do that. Thank you everybody for listening. On behalf of Nikki Kinzer, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll catch you next week on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.